Chaos is unfolding in Britain like never before, and this time, even King Charles cannot stay silent. The country is in uproar after shocking scenes emerged of farmers, peaceful protesters, and even ordinary voters being dragged away by police, under orders from Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government. Arrested not for crimes, but for daring to resist Labour's crushing new policies. The British people are furious. The countryside is burning with outrage. But behind the palace walls, an even greater storm is brewing. Royal insiders have revealed that King Charles himself has exploded in rage, furious over Starmer's crackdown on free speech and civil rights. For the first time in decades, the monarchy has directly clashed with Downing Street. The King's secret warnings to Starmer have been leaked, and what they reveal could shake the foundations of British politics forever. It all began with Labour's latest attack on Britain's farmers, a devastating new inheritance tax that has left rural communities reeling. For centuries, family farms in counties like Kent, Somerset, and Lincolnshire have been passed down from generation to generation, a proud legacy of hard work and tradition. But now, under Keir Starmer's government, that legacy is under direct assault. The new tax rules have made it nearly impossible for families to keep their land without being forced to sell large portions just to cover the tax bill. For the farmers of Britain, this was the final straw. Furious at being targeted while big city elites and multinational corporations remain untouched, the farmers rose in protest. Convoys of tractors filled the roads, blocking major routes into cities. Auction yards were shut down. Entire fields became makeshift protest camps. What was meant to be quiet, lawful resistance soon turned into something far more dangerous. But Starmer's government didn't respond with understanding or compromise. Instead, they sent in the police. Shocking videos flooded social media showing armed officers dragging farmers away in handcuffs. Elderly landowners, some in their 70s, were arrested on their own property. Tearful mothers were restrained as their young sons, workers on the farms, were thrown into police vans. One horrifying clip showed a disabled veteran, now a small farm owner in Yorkshire, being shoved to the ground for refusing to abandon his protest camp. The images struck a nerve across Britain, sparking outrage not just in rural towns, but in cities, suburbs, and even within the walls of Buckingham Palace. As the protests spread, something even more chilling emerged. It wasn't just farmers being targeted. Reports began to surface that ordinary voters, citizens who dared to speak out at Labour's town hall meetings, were also being arrested. A single mother in Manchester was dragged away for questioning soaring energy bills. A pensioner in Birmingham was handcuffed for protesting brutal benefit cuts. In Newcastle, a war veteran was forcibly removed after angrily challenging a Labour MP over rising taxes. These were not dangerous criminals. These were everyday Britons, taxpayers, voters, workers, being silenced for daring to question their own government. The message was clear. In Starmer's Britain, dissent would not be tolerated. And then came the royal eruption. According to sources close to the palace, King Charles was horrified when he saw the footage. Advisers reported that the usually calm monarch slammed his hand on the table during a private briefing, demanding to know why peaceful farmers and elderly citizens were being treated like enemies of the state. One insider claimed the king muttered under his breath, "This is not the Britain my mother left behind. This is tyranny in disguise." But it didn't stop there. In an extraordinary breach of protocol, the king reportedly picked up the phone and personally called the Prime Minister, a move almost unheard of in modern British politics. The palace has remained silent on the call's contents, but leaks have revealed that Charles issued a dire warning. "You are testing the patience of this kingdom. You are pushing this nation towards the brink." For the first time in his reign, the king's frustration with the government could no longer be hidden. His anger was real, and the nation was about to find out. Meanwhile, Starmer's response was even more shocking. Rather than backing down, the Prime Minister doubled down. New emergency laws were rushed through Parliament, giving police even broader powers to break up protests, detain suspected agitators, and ban what the government calls disruptive political messaging. The media, tightly controlled by Labour-friendly outlets, barely reported the new laws. But in Reform UK circles, among Farage supporters and angry rural voters, the message was clear. Starmer was preparing for an even greater crackdown. Reform UK's stunning victories in local elections had terrified Labour, and the government was now using every tool at its disposal to crush the rebellion before it could spread. But there was a problem. Britain was waking up. Videos of the arrests were going viral on platforms Labour couldn't control. Farmers in France, Germany and the Netherlands, already veterans of their own anti-government protests, sent messages of support to their British cousins. Even inside Labour's ranks, dissent was growing. Some backbench MPs broke ranks, warning that the party's war on the countryside was political suicide. And all the while, the king watched in fury, his patience running dangerously thin. In private, royal aides were said to be drafting emergency statements. One memo leaked from the palace warned that unless Starmer backed down, the king might be forced to express grave public concern over the government's actions, a move that could trigger a constitutional crisis not seen in Britain for nearly a century. The monarchy and the government were now on a collision course, and the people knew it. In pubs, in village halls, on city streets, whispers spread. Was the king preparing to act? Could the crown finally stand up against an out-of-control parliament? Was Starmer's grip on power slipping away faster than anyone thought? As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Britain reached boiling point. What started as a localised rural protest had now spread like wildfire across the entire nation. Farmers, lorry drivers, energy workers, teachers, even retired pensioners were pouring into the streets in defiance of Starmer's government. Tractors rolled into city centres, blocking the entrances of government buildings and Labour Party offices. Roadways in London, Manchester and Birmingham ground to a halt as thousands of angry citizens formed human barricades, waving banners that read "No more tyranny" and "Reclaim our country." Meanwhile, on social media, videos of brutal police crackdowns were shared millions of times, showing the world a side of Britain the government desperately wanted to keep hidden. Elderly women shoved by riot shields, school teachers arrested outside Parliament, and weeping teenagers dragged from protest camps. It was all out there for the public to see. No amount of government spin or media control could stop the growing tide of fury sweeping the nation. But it wasn't just the protesters who were furious. Inside the very heart of power, cracks were beginning to show. Sources from Buckingham Palace whispered of heated arguments between King Charles and his most senior advisors. Some royal insiders begged him to remain neutral, to preserve the monarchy's traditional political distance. But Charles, deeply shaken by the images of peaceful citizens being manhandled by state forces, was no longer willing to stay silent. Reports leaked that he had summoned senior ministers to a private audience at the palace, a rare and symbolic gesture that sent shockwaves through Westminster. No official statement was made, but palace insiders confirmed that the king issued a grave warning. If the government continued down this path, the monarchy might have no choice but to publicly intervene, a constitutional move that could ignite the greatest political crisis Britain had faced since the days of Edward. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer and his inner circle appeared trapped in a bunker mentality, refusing to acknowledge the growing rebellion outside their walls. Rather than easing tensions, Starmer ordered an even harsher crackdown. Police were given emergency powers to detain protest organisers without charge. Roadblocks were set up across key transport routes to stop farmers from reaching London. Intelligence agencies were tasked with monitoring so-called domestic dissidents, a label that now included anyone sharing anti-government content online. Newspapers loyal to the Labour Party dismissed the protests as the work of far-right agitators and disgruntled conspiracy theorists, but no one was buying it. The sight of lifelong Labour voters being dragged away by police shattered that illusion completely. Even former Labour ministers began to speak out in disgust. One veteran MP anonymously told the press, "This is madness. Starmer is destroying our party, our credibility, and the country itself." But perhaps the most shocking development came when Reform UK leader Nigel Farage appeared at one of the largest protest rallies in recent memory, held outside the Houses of Parliament. Standing atop a hastily assembled stage, Farage addressed a roaring crowd of over 50,000 angry citizens. "This is not the Britain we voted for," he shouted, his voice carrying over the sea of Union Jacks and protest banners. "This is not democracy. It is dictatorship dressed in Labour red." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Farage's appearance marked a turning point. What had started as isolated rural anger had now merged with a nationwide political rebellion. Reform UK's message was no longer fringe. It was now the battle cry of millions. Labour's nightmare had become reality. In response, the government panicked. Reports surfaced that Starmer had held emergency talks with security chiefs to discuss the possible deployment of military units to protect key infrastructure and government buildings, a move unseen in peacetime Britain for decades. Whispers of martial law filled the air, fanned by leaks from Whitehall insiders, warning that the Prime Minister was prepared to declare a state of emergency if protests escalated further. But such a move carried unimaginable risk. The sight of British soldiers on the streets would surely enrage the public even more and push King Charles into open opposition. Already, the monarch's patience was wearing thin. His aides were said to be drafting a public address that could shake the nation to its core, a speech condemning the government's actions and urging restraint. But so far, the king had held back, hoping against hope that Starmer would come to his senses. Meanwhile, Reform UK surged in the polls. Constituencies that had been Labour strongholds for generations now showed double-digit swings toward Farage's party. In the Midlands, the North, and even parts of Wales, ordinary voters, disgusted by the government's behaviour, flocked to the Reform banner. Party membership exploded overnight. Local Labour councillors resigned in protest, defecting to Reform UK or declaring themselves independents. Even trade unions, once loyal to Labour, issued furious statements condemning the arrests of working-class protesters. Britain was changing, and fast. And all the while, the spectre of the king loomed over the crisis. Royal watchers noted the king's sudden absences from public engagements, his grim expressions during state events, and the nervous whispers of palace officials. Something was brewing behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, something that had not been seen in modern British history. The question on everyone's lips was the same. Would King Charles make the ultimate move? Would the monarch break his silence and openly defy the government? As the sun set over London, casting long shadows across the battered city, the sense of approaching doom was impossible to ignore. The clash between Crown and Parliament was no longer unthinkable. It was inevitable. But as Britain watched and waited for what would happen next, the situation took an even darker turn. Whispers emerged from within the heart of the government, chilling rumours of secret meetings in Downing Street late at night, where Starmer and his closest advisers discussed emergency measures that would make the recent crackdowns seem tame. According to high-level leaks, the Prime Minister had been presented with plans for full-scale suppression of Reform UK's operations. These measures included shutting down party offices under new public safety laws, freezing party bank accounts suspected of receiving foreign influence, and banning Reform UK's political ads from major broadcasters under the pretext of preventing misinformation. If enacted, these moves would effectively silence Labour's greatest political threat overnight. But such a step would also plunge the country into the gravest constitutional crisis since the English Civil War. And it was this prospect, the shadow of full-blown dictatorship, that finally pushed Buckingham Palace to act. Late one evening, as the nation was distracted by the rolling news coverage of fresh farmer arrests in Devon and a fiery Reform UK protest outside Cardiff City Hall, a quiet but extraordinary meeting took place inside Buckingham Palace. King Charles summoned his most senior legal and constitutional advisers, along with several trusted former politicians, including respected elder statesmen from both the Labour and Conservative parties. The message from the king was clear and chilling. He wanted to know the full extent of his royal powers to intervene if Starmer crossed the line into authoritarian rule. Could the Crown legally dissolve Parliament? Could the king force the resignation of a sitting Prime Minister? Could he refuse royal assent to Starmer's oppressive new laws? The answers shocked the room. Under Britain's unwritten constitution, the monarch, though symbolic, still held ultimate reserve powers that could be used in an extreme national emergency. And now, for the first time in living memory, a British monarch was openly considering using them. Word of the king's inquiries quickly reached Downing Street. Sources revealed that Starmer, upon hearing of the monarch's private preparations, was livid. In a secret late-night phone call to Buckingham Palace, Starmer is believed to have furiously demanded an explanation. But instead of the quiet reassurance he sought, Starmer received a blunt and unprecedented message. The king would not stand by while Britain slid into tyranny. If Starmer pushed further, the Crown would respond. The palace leaks made headlines the next morning, sending shockwaves through the political world. King Charles warns PM, back down or face royal intervention, blared the Daily Express. The Times reported that constitutional scholars were being consulted on what could happen if the king exercised his reserve powers to block Starmer's oppressive laws. Suddenly, what had seemed impossible was being discussed openly in Parliament, in the media, and in households across the nation. A showdown between monarch and Prime Minister was no longer fantasy. It was becoming a terrifying reality. But Starmer, trapped by pride and panic, refused to change course. Instead, he unleashed another wave of repressive action that would become the breaking point. On a grey, rain-soaked morning in early June, police raided the main headquarters of Reform UK in central London. Armed officers stormed the building, seized computers and files, and arrested several senior party officials on vague charges of inciting unrest. Live footage of the raid aired on independent news channels within minutes, showing shocked party staff in handcuffs being led away under heavy guard. The government claimed the operation was necessary to prevent planned disruptions to public order. But few believed the official line. Across the country, fury exploded. Reform supporters, enraged beyond measure, poured into the streets in spontaneous protests. Thousands gathered outside police stations demanding the release of arrested officials. Farmers returned to the motorways, blocking major transport routes in protest convoys. Energy workers staged walkouts. Port employees in Dover and Liverpool threatened to shut down critical shipping hubs unless the government backed off. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The king paced his private study, receiving constant updates from aides and intelligence briefings from security chiefs. One close advisor later leaked that Charles was seen muttering to himself, shaking his head in disbelief at the chaos unfolding. He couldn't believe it had come to this, the insider said. He was ready to act. Everyone knew it. Draft versions of a potential royal address were prepared, speeches that would denounce the government's actions, call for calm, and possibly demand Starmer's immediate resignation. Such a statement would shatter every modern tradition of British politics. It would be a bombshell heard around the world. But the king knew if he waited too long, Britain might descend into civil disorder from which it could not recover. And then came the moment that broke the deadlock. A group of 20 Labour MPs, terrified by the government's direction and horrified by the Reform UK raid, resigned the party whip live on national television. In a dramatic press conference outside Westminster, they declared they could no longer serve a government that arrested political opponents and crushed free speech. "This is not the Labour Party I joined," said one tearful MP. "I will not be part of this assault on British democracy." Their defections left Starmer's parliamentary majority in ruins. Within hours, calls for a vote of no confidence filled the air. The markets tumbled. The pound sank. Foreign embassies issued travel warnings to citizens visiting the UK. The sense of imminent collapse hung over the government like a thundercloud. For King Charles, the path was now clear. The monarchy could no longer remain silent. Preparations began for an emergency national address, the first of its kind since the dark days of World War II. Senior bishops, military chiefs, and constitutional experts were summoned to the palace to advise on the speech's content. Every word, every phrase had to be carefully crafted. The message would carry the weight of history, and it would likely decide the fate of Keir Starmer's government. As Britain held its breath, waiting for the king to speak, the question on everyone's lips was simple. Would this be the end for Starmer? Would the monarchy's intervention mark the final fall of a prime minister who had pushed too far, silenced too many, and betrayed the very people he had sworn to serve? The answer was coming, and nothing in British politics would ever be the same again. And so, Britain stands at the edge of an historic reckoning. Never before in modern times has the fragile balance between Parliament and Crown been tested so brutally. The people's anger is boiling over. Reform UK is rising like a tidal wave. Labour is fracturing from within, and the King himself, bound by duty and destiny, is preparing to speak words that could shake the very foundations of British democracy. Will Keir Starmer cling to power, defying not only the will of the people, but the authority of the monarchy itself? Or will the weight of public fury, political collapse, and royal defiance force him to step down in disgrace, ending one of the most disastrous premierships in living memory? The next few days will decide everything. A nation waits, holding its breath. And so we ask you, what do you think will happen next? Will King Charles make history and bring down the Prime Minister? Or will Starmer survive the storm and drag Britain deeper into chaos? Share your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe our channel for more UK news. Thank you.